Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AFA's President, General Larry Spencer.
Thank you all so much, and welcome back from the break. It's been a great morning and a great start to a great conference, so thank you so much for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, and I am honored to regard him as not only a superb leader, but as a mentor and a friend. I got to share a foxhole with General Welsh in the Pentagon for 3 years. And as I know General Wilson will attest, one of the things the Vice Chief gets to do is attend all the meetings that the Chief doesn't want to attend, particularly when the Chief is out of town. And during my tenure, General Welsh was out of town a lot. I'm not exactly sure why, but I got to attend a lot of meetings. But I got to tell you, there is not a finer leader. And what I got to learn, actually more important than that, at least as far as I'm concerned, is there's also not a finer person or a finer husband or a finer father than General Welsh. He now serves as the Dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M. And many of you have heard him speak before. He is a very accomplished speaker. But more than that, General Welsh loves airmen. When I first met General Welsh, he told me that every airman has a story, and he was right. And he spent most of his tenure telling you about airmen stories. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the stage the 20th Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, General Mark Welsh.
Thanks, buddy. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, and thanks for the calming music. They told me you were going to play something with a little more zip to it so I could try the old stanky leg up here for the crowd. Kind of kick things off. Thanks for letting me be here. Dawn, I haven't seen you yet. Excuse me, I have to hug the Chief's wife.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you. It's a thrill to be here and to see all of you. Thanks for taking the time to come. Larry asked me to come and start what he hopes is a new series for AFA that is not really a speech or a presentation, it's more of a conversation. And it's just about a different topic each cycle. So he asked me to come talk about leadership in disruptive times, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, for those of you who know Betty, she couldn't be here. She's on grandmother duty this week. And she wanted me to say hi, because she's got a lot of friends in this audience, and she misses you. We wish we could be taking more selfies like this in DC instead of in our backyard in Texas. Okay, I'm lying. I'm really lying. But we do miss you guys, even if we don't miss Washington all day, every day. She's still a babe, and there's still a mystery why she's hanging around with me. Larry mentioned I'm the dean of a college now, and the perceptive among you may be able to look at this picture of a recent dean's meeting at Texas A&M and pick me out. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm having a blast. It's young energy. It's people who want to change the world. In our college, it's all graduate students who want to go into public service, and 70% of them do since the school opened. That's a phenomenal statistic if you're not a service academy. There's nobody else even close, which makes it a lot of fun. It's like coming to work with you guys every single day. And I had the great privilege of getting to know this guy. The school is named after Bush 41. This is the last time I saw President Bush, last summer in Kennebunkport. He was still grieving from the loss of his wife, but gracious as always. He is just a wonderful human being. He's a great father, a great husband, a great friend, a great American patriot, and he cares about everybody he runs into, and that's what attracted me to him. He's an incredible guy. And the reason I raise this at all is because I want to say thank you on behalf of his family. I think that week of celebrations after he died, that was all about the person and not about the politics, was really, really something special. And so many stories of people who met him one time or bumped into him in a hallway or in an event and talked about how he made them feel, how respectful he was, how respected they felt, which was kind of the magic of him when you met him. His family wanted me every chance I get to say thank you for them, for the outpouring of love from across the nation during the week of celebration, really. It wasn't tragic. He had an unbelievably long, productive, impactful life. It was sad for them, but it was actually very celebratory. I think the thing was capped off by that train ride from Houston to College Station, where he's now buried right out behind our building, in fact. Every picture from that train ride impacted me. Whether he was leaving Houston or going through small towns, every dirt road that hit that railroad track between Houston and College Station had somebody parked near it just to pass their well wishes to the family and to President Bush. This guy may be my favorite. This is Texas. But this captures the state better than any other picture I saw. So on behalf of the Bush children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, thank you for those of you who went to the Capitol to see him lying in state in the rotunda, because there are people in this room who did. Thanks to the companies that sent notes and blogs and emails thanking him for his service and passing your well wishes to the family and your condolences. They have a lot of people to thank, and they've asked me to try and help, so thank you. I know they appreciate it, and I'll tell you, I'm honored to be leading a school that bears his name. I'm not going to talk a lot about the chairman. I just thought it was interesting after hearing the comments this morning about his passing that 6 years ago, this month, in this facility, I talked about 6 great Air Force leaders who died during the previous 6 to 8 months. There was Bob Rutherford, David Jones, former chief and former chairman. There was Colonel Ruth Lucas, our first African-American female promoted to colonel in our Air Force. There was 3 great warriors, Ralph Parr. Colonel Ralph Parr had just died. Lieutenant General Boots Blase had just died. And then, of course, Colonel Bud Day had also just died. And right after I put up slides with each of their pictures, I put this picture up because the chairman was at the podium that day, just as Chairman Peters has been today. And I reminded everybody that all the heroes aren't gone. And talked about the things he'd done for his Air Force, as you heard this morning. And now the chairman's gone. Rest in peace. Thanks for your example, sir. He was an amazing guy. Larry, thank you for the introduction. You said some things that people don't usually say in introductions, and they honored me, especially the part about family and friendship, because that's the bottom line for all of us. I also want to thank Larry personally for what he's done for this organization. He's been remarkable leading it. Would you join me in a round of applause for the work that he's done? And he's got a theme song. I love that. Orville, where'd you go? Congratulations, buddy. Thanks for picking up the torch. Orville Wright loves airmen. Orville Wright has worked hard to stay connected to airmen and to our Air Force since he retired. He is connected like very few people in this room are who've left active duty. And he brings a passion that will just continue things in the right directions. Orville, we're excited to have you on board. Thanks for leading us. Okay, the topic, leadership in disruptive times. I struggled with this a little bit because I started to try and figure out what does disruptive times mean? And which times have been less disruptive and which have been more disruptive, and how do you adjust your leadership style to fit them? I mean, I really struggle with this. So I decided to go back in time and look at the last 100 years and figure out what was different during different periods. Where was it not disruptive? Where were things smooth? I started by looking at Stars and Stripes of the American Expeditionary Force 100 years ago. This paper actually came out, we're about a year away from the exact 100-year anniversary of this, but this is when Prime Minister of Britain, David Lloyd George, greeted the American Expeditionary Forces that arrived in Europe as the U.S. got joined in earnest into World War I. Interesting things on that headline. If you look at it, the article just to the right of Lloyd George's picture and the one right below it talk about the first medals for valor being given to members of that AEF. So they didn't waste a whole lot of time between the ship and the front line. And a year after this paper came out, we were dealing with the aftermath of a war that had just ended and left 16 million people dead. That was a pretty disruptive time. The 20s were all about recovering from World War I, replacing entire generations of young men in towns across America who'd been lost in that fight, not to mention the losses in Europe. And it was about other stuff like flappers and gangsters and, hey, prohibition. It was on, it was off, it was on again, it was off again. You can drink. This was big news. The 20s were a time of social upheaval and change in our country. The difference between really wealthy and really not wealthy was significant. And by the end of the 20s, there was kind of a powder keg brewing. And in October of 1929, it finally blew up on Black Tuesday when the stock market crashed. And so as we stepped into the decades of the 30s, we also stepped into the Great Depression, which completely defined that decade in the US. In Europe, the Nazi Party was on the rise. Germany was remilitarizing. In 1936, Hitler tested the new blitzkrieg warfare concept in the Spanish Civil War. And then in 1939, they invaded Poland. The 40s was consumed by World War II and the aftermath. The 50s didn't take long to get into another war, this time in Korea. The civil rights movement that actually started in the 40s started to gain a little momentum in the 50s. In the 60s, wow, lots of things happened in the 60s. That civil rights movement, the flames were ignited even further. It became very intense. Racial tension spread across our country. The Vietnam War started. The 60s were a tough time. President Kennedy was assassinated. That's a little disruptive. The 70s, the Vietnam War continued, and then when it ended, we went about rebuilding the American military, both physically and in some ways spiritually. Watergate happened in the 70s. President Nixon resigned in the 70s. The feminist movement began and swept across the country. In the 80s, the Cold War raged until it abruptly ended at the end of the decade. And we stepped into the 90s going, where's the enemy? Where's the peace dividend? What do our allies now do? Didn't take long to figure it out because another war started almost right away. As Saddam Hussein went into Kuwait. And we went into Afghanistan and then Iraq. The first World Trade Center bombing happened in the 90s. In the 2000s, 9/11 kicked off the global war on terror, a war in Afghanistan, a war in the Balkans. From 2010 till today, that war has continued. Budget Control Act, sequestration, furloughs, government shutdowns, ISIS, toxic politics. Okay, so that's the last 100 years. So here's the question I was struggling with. Do you really need a different leadership style and different things you do when it gets disruptive, or should you just do these things all the time because you're going to be disrupted? And I believe the answer is the second thing. You're in disruptive times. You are always going to be in disruptive times. And even when the big world calms down for a little bit, and your squadron's cooking along, or your company is cooking along, at a moment's notice, something can happen that changes that. A training accident, and you're dealing with a death in the unit. Investigation starts, blame's being assessed, fingers are being pointed, the whole world crumbles in your unit. It gets disruptive in a heartbeat. In industry, you got a corner on the market, things are going great, and then a new disruptive technology is developed, and it's not developed by you. Your world changes. If you go back to the last 100 years and you look on the business side of the world, there is a parallel series of events that went along with the ones I just talked about. Markets opening and crashing, currencies climbing and then dropping, new markets emerging and then disintegrating, new technology falls apart. The world's disruptive. So my view is get ready to lead in it. If you're going to lead in a world that's disruptive all the time, or when your unit starts to feel that instability that comes with disruption, I do think there's one thing that is fundamentally important. And that's that if you plan to lead, you better step up now, as soon as you recognize the signs, and step out front and lead. You have to be visible. You have to communicate. You've got to take on the toughest issues first. You've got to do the kind of things that these two people are doing right now in these disruptive times. They're great role models for this. Seriously. There's some other things, once you've made that decision to step up and accept that challenge, the responsibility, and I think even the privilege of leading your team, whatever that team is, through the chaos. There's some things you can do that I think are pretty simple things. Great leadership principles are never complicated, but that doesn't make them easy. I'll just offer 5 of them today, and you can take them or leave them. I think this one's critically important. Your people are up to their eyebrows in common sense. That's how they succeed. They do really difficult work in really difficult places. They create, on the industry side, new products, new technology. They figure out how to build it. They figure out how to market it. They figure out how to sell it and improve it and maintain it and sustain it. And then the people in here in uniform take it and go do the nation's business with it. This is hard work, and it's not theoretical work. Common sense matters. And if you have regulations, policies that don't align with common sense, change them. They're stupid. Even if there's law that doesn't align with common sense, go after it. You heard the secretary talking about it this morning. Change the things that don't make sense. This is an air base in Africa. We flew remotely piloted aircraft out of this place. The first time I flew in there, I'm in an airplane, we fly up the runway, and there was a troop of baboons on the runway, so we couldn't land. So we had to do a low approach to scare them off. And after we landed and we were back taxiing down the runway, I noticed that every one of the runway lights is broken. And as we taxied by, I'm looking at them, and there's a broken runway light and a rock next to it. And when we got onto the ramp later, the airmen who were there said, yeah, the baboons don't like the buzzing sound they make, that humming sound when you turn the lights on at night, so they break all the lights. And they leave their tool there in case we fix the lights. It's a great place. So I'm laughing about this, and I said, hey, you have any other animal problems here? And they said, yeah, we actually do. We had a leopard on the runway yesterday, and we had to delay flying. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, there's a line right there on that yellow center line, right where it turns onto that's a taxiway coming at the runway. It's the only taxiway. And so when you turn, where it turns the line up on the center line, there was a leopard lying there. So they get up in the morning, they see the leopard, and they say, well, we got to get the leopard off the runway. So they're warming to this story, and I'm thinking, how do you get a leopard off the runway? And the guy says, well, sir, first plan was we were just going to go shoo it off. So 3 of them actually started out to shoo the leopard off the runway. Now, this is a full-grown male African leopard. This is not like a kitten leopard. And they got about 20 steps out, and they kind of looked at each other and came back and went, bad plan. Plan B, we'll take the fire truck out there and we'll kind of nudge it off the runway. Much better plan. So they get in one of those old-schooly fire trucks, that are all over Africa, and they drive out to the runway, and they go beak to beak with this leopard. He's laying on the center line. They nudge up to him. They're kind of leaning over looking on the windshield so they don't hit him, because you can't hurt a leopard. It's against the law. And they get right up next to him, and he's just not impressed or intimidated. He's going nowhere. So they stop the truck, and they're thinking, okay, now what do we do? When the leopard notices the shade under the truck. So he gets up, he walks underneath the truck, and he lays down. So now you got a leopard on the center line with a fire truck on top of it. And they're afraid to move the fire truck because they can't hurt the leopard. So they get out of the truck, and they go walking down the side of the truck, and now they're all squatting down now, looking at a full-grown male African-American leopard about 5 feet from them, who may or may not have eaten breakfast, and maybe upset. And what's plan C here? Luckily, there were these long poles on the side of the fire truck with those hooks on them. And everybody knows that if you poke a leopard from this side of the truck, he'll run out the other side. So they poked the leopard, who rolled over on his back and was swatting at this pole. He's a cute little kitty. Until he got tired of the game and rolled over on his stomach looked at them and gave them the "I don't like this game" noise, which got their attention. They dropped the stick, they jumped up on the side of the fire truck. And then again, 5 seconds into this, they look at each other, and there's 3 well-trained, disciplined, highly professional airmen hanging on the side of a truck 3 feet off the ground, about 5 feet from now an upset leopard who may not have eaten. They realize this is a bad plan. They drop, they run, they get back in the fire truck. Need a plan D. We'll tranquilize him. Good plan. So they call in on the radio, they get the doc, the med tech who is deployed on the radio. "Doc, mix us up a tranquilizer." "Roger, I'm on it." Now think about this for a minute. How many med techs we got in here who had leopard tranquilizer training before they deployed? But she is off doing the deed. So now all they need is a tranquilizer gun, which they don't have. So they go looking all over this little airport. You saw in that picture, and there wasn't much of anybody there. There was no tranquilizer gun, but they did find a big plastic syringe, one of those great big ones. So now they've got the syringe, they've got the tranquilizing agent, and all they need is a volunteer. Amazingly, the youngest airman on the deployment volunteered. And he was literally headed out with this, hypodermic needle, because when you put that thing in the leopard, it keels over instantly. It doesn't have time to fillet you before it takes effect. And the chief master sergeant who was on the deployment showed up, luckily, right then, and stopped the madness. Now, these are about 100 great airmen who were doing unbelievably good work in really interesting conditions. Phenomenal people, phenomenal professionalism, and where was common sense? It will take a vacation. And if you're leading, especially if you're leading in any kind of disruptive time or disruptive environment, you cannot let yours go. You're the common sense monitor. Don't forget this. The second thing I think is really important for a leader in an unstable environment to think about is you have to create stability. Some kind of stability, something your people can count on, something that's not going to change. Everything else is changing. It can be anything. It can be your unit identity. It can be their faith in you and your leadership team. It can be your pride in the young people on the team. But something has got to be created, emphasized, reinforced constantly that your people know will be there tomorrow. This is London in 1940. Imagine being a citizen of London during the German air bombardment. All of your European allies have been ground to pieces by the German war machine, which was spectacular. And Hitler has turned his sights now on you. And you've seen great people, great militaries, try and resist him and fail to that point. And now they're bombarding your city, your home, in the dark. And the invasion is coming. Everybody knew it. What do we do? I can't even imagine a more disruptive time. Well, you listen to your prime minister, who went to the House of Commons on the 4th of June in 1940 and said this. And Britons across the country said, that's what we'll do. We'll fight. We'll fight on the beaches. We'll fight on the landing grounds, the fields, the streets, the hills. And we will never surrender. A leader stepping out front, creating stability of thought, stability of purpose, something his people could rally around. There's other examples of this, a little closer to home. You know, when you're chief of staff of the Air Force, you get to do some things that you just are not worthy of doing. And one of the things that I was privileged to do was speak at Robbie Reisner's funeral. What a hero. Right before me, Ross Perot stood up and talked about his lifelong friend in a really incredibly moving way. And then I stood up to the podium and I looked out at the audience and I saw the Reisner family and I saw 40 of his fellow POWs sitting out there looking at me. And they had just finished telling me before the service about how he was their rock. He was their moral advisor. He was the guy they turned to when they desperately needed leadership. in the camps. Most of them didn't think they would survive the experience until he convinced them they would. They believed because he believed. And he never lost that faith. They talk about him in reverent terms. He created stability. Stability of purpose, stability of hope. What an amazing guy. When this service was over, we all walked outside. They carried that casket out, and the great Air Force Honor Guard put him on a caisson. The band led the way. The Honor Guard followed that caisson, and the rest of us walked behind, and we followed him as they took him down through the hills into the beautiful grounds of Arlington Cemetery. And if Betty was here, she would nod her head when I say this, because we walked side by side, and we could feel 400,000 American heroes rise up to meet him and to pay their respects and to welcome him home. What an airman. I think if you're going to lead in disruptive times, you better believe in your people, all your people. We tend to, when it gets uncomfortable for us as leaders, when things get a little shaky, when kind of things are falling apart around us, we place our trust in the people we know the best, the ones we've known the longest, the ones we know can perform. We place our faith in our senior officers, our senior NCOs, our senior civilian leaders. And there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes we forget that that leaves the more junior folks in the organization feeling like we don't trust them. And I think it's important in disruptive times to remember that they're disruptive because we don't know how to handle them. We don't have a ready-made answer for the next step. We're trying to figure it out. That's why it feels so unstable. Those young folks in our organizations, whether they're design engineers at a defense firm or they're lieutenants or young airmen in an Air Force squadron, they bring new ideas, new perspectives, new potential solutions, new skills. Sometimes they are the solution to the problem you're looking at. Believe in them. And maybe even more importantly, give them a voice. When I was coming out of the Air Force Academy, I was having a dinner at my house one time for a bunch of cadets. And my son John was a member of the class, of the freshman class that time, and we had about 10 of them at the house. And as we're going around the table talking, they started talking about a movie that I knew had just come out like the previous Thursday. This is on a Sunday afternoon. And they're talking about how great this movie was, and I'm sitting there thinking, how did they go downtown to see this movie? Because they're not allowed to leave the academy. So finally, I couldn't stand it anymore, and I said, hey, just out of curiosity, guys, how'd you get downtown to see the movie? And the answer was, oh, no, sir, we watched it on our computer in our rooms. I said, really? Was it a special or something they had online? He goes, oh, no, we got it on the K drive. The K drive. So the next morning, I went into my staff meeting, and at the end of the meeting, I said, okay, I got one last question. What's the K drive? And a poor senior master sergeant at the back of the room said, well, sir, that's it's expansion space. It's future growth space, for our IT system. It's nothing. I said, hey, will you do me a favor? Would you go look at the K drive and come back and let me know what's on it? He goes, sir, there's nothing on there. I said, humor me. So he went, left, and he came back about an hour later, and kind of a timid knock this time at the door. And he goes, sir, we got a little bit of a problem. There are some wave files on the K drive. I said, wave files? He said, yeah. And I said, like, what you mean, like movies? And he said, yes, sir. I said, how many wave files are on the K drive? He said, just under 800. And I said, what kind of movies are on the K drive? Oh, all kinds of movies are on the K drive, sir. I said, okay, well, get them off the K drive and let me know when it's done. So I didn't hear nothing until that evening. And I would an even softer knock at the door about 6 o'clock, and the poor senior master sergeant comes back in and says, sir, we got a little bit bigger problem than we thought. I said, well, what's up? He said, we can't get into the K drive. We literally, after 3 days of trying, had to call down to the Air Intelligence Agency at that time because we didn't all have network and diagnostics and all that. And we had to bring an Air Force hacker up to hack into our own drive, clear it off, and then lock the cadets out. They're remarkable. They're scary. And they can create solutions that we can't imagine. Use that as a tool when things get disruptive. When I was the commandant at the academy, this now Master Sergeant work for me. This is Master Sergeant Carissa Kerrigan. She works in the Wing Cybersecurity Office of the 122nd Fighter Wing in Indiana Air National Guard. She is a great lady. She's got two beautiful young daughters, 114 and 110. Her name was Carissa Cetus when she worked for me, and she was an A1C when she started. And she worked out in the admin shop outside my office. I walked out of the office one morning, and I'd just gotten a request to speak at the Wharton Business School. They wanted me to talk about what leaders should provide to their people. I said, okay. So I walk out, and I'm just kind of talking to myself as I go, and I say, hey, Carissa, what should I tell the people at Wharton about what I should be providing to you as a leader? And she stopped and got a very serious look on her face, and she said, sir, let me think about that for a little bit, and I'll get back to you. And I went, I was kind of kidding, but she was not. So she went away, and later that day, she came back in, and we spent a long time talking about her thoughts on what leaders should provide to their airmen. Now, I'm going to show you exactly what my notes were from that meeting. Now, these are my words, but they are clearly and 100% her thoughts as a 19-year-old A1C. I'll just let you read them. So next time you want to have somebody come up here and talk about leadership, bring an A1C in here. Let them talk to you about what they expect of you. This is gold. Give them a voice when times are tough. I think you also have to do this. This pride thing is fundamental to who we are as a service. It's fundamental to who we are as human beings. It's my son Matt at my retirement ceremony. He is a very proud Marine infantry officer. He's also a complete meathead. Some of you were there, but this is Matt explaining to the gathered dignitaries that he realized he couldn't come into the Air Force on the day he was going through my closet and saw the service coat with the 4 stars on it, decided to try it on, and his bicep wouldn't fit in the sleeve. That's what he's telling everybody right there. I thought the secretary was going to fall off the stage. And I thought the honor guard was going to charge him for me. He's a very proud guy. Watching him on that stage made me a very proud dad. This pride thing runs deep in every single one of us. This is a statue in College Station, Texas. It's at a park called Veterans Park. It's a depiction of, it's called Come and Take It. It's a depiction of the Texas War and Independence. It's a fascinating sculpture because when you walk up to it, you can't see the eyes in this photo very well because of the shadow. But the eyes are very clearly something has startled this guy. And he has his rifle still in his arm, but he's turning to look for it, and he's instinctively reaching behind his back for something. And when you go to the other side of the statue, you see what he's doing is pulling his Bowie knife out of the scabbard. He's got it about halfway out. It's a great sculpture. When I saw it, I mean, I rocketed back in time to 1965. I was 11 years old. My family had just returned from 5 years in the UK. Dad was assigned over there. And we were in Corpus Christi visiting his parents, and he said, okay, load up the car. We're going to San Antonio. It's time all of you saw the Alamo for the first time. So we went to the Alamo, and I learned about that great story, learned about Jim Bowie. I was fascinated by the idea that he was laying in a cot for the last couple of days of the siege, and that Travis, the commander, had gone downstairs the morning of the final push by the Mexican army. They knew this was going to be it. He talked to him, thanked him for staying, which Bowie did not have to do. Kind of one of those moments between warriors that nobody will ever fully appreciate except warriors. And then he made sure the 2 pistols Bowie had were laying next to him on the cot and that his knife was laying on that little end table. And you know the legend after that. The Alamo is overwhelmed. The only person left alive is Jim Bowie lying on a cot in that storage room near death. And the Mexican soldiers show up at the door to the storage room. And he picks up those pistols and shoots the first 2 through the door. Then he reaches for the knife. Now, nobody really knows what happened in that room, except the soldiers who were there, because he was killed. One of the Mexican soldiers later wrote an article and talked about all the bullet and stab wounds that were in his body. That's where the legend started. What we do know is that when his mother, Reza Bowie, was told about the story and told of her son's death and the condition of his body and all the wounds he'd suffered, we know she said this. This is the greatest mom quote in history. And I always hoped if I died defending my country that my mom would say something like this. I challenged her on it. I also wondered from that day forward what would happen if I was Jim Bowie and I was lying in that cot near death and I knew everybody else was dead and the Mexican army showed up at the door of that storage room. Would I beg for mercy? Or would I empty those guns into the first two people and reach for that knife? In some audiences, I'd ask, what would you do? But I'm pretty confident I know exactly what you'd do. Pride matters. It matters in a big way. And your airmen have it in spades. When things get disruptive, figure out the thing they're most proud about and just stoke the flame and never quit. Pride is one of the strongest types of connective tissue. It connects people to people, people to organizations, people to ideas, people to courage. It will stabilize your organization, create the stability that you're looking for, and get you through any disruptive times. It's been proven over and over and over again. Preserve the pride. And finally, care. Care enough that it hurts sometimes. The tougher it gets, the more unstable it gets, the more uncertainty there is around your people, the more they need you to care. It's what you signed up for when you said you wanted to lead. You got to care about them, about their tools, about their mission, about their future, about their families, about everything related to them. You all know that. But understand that when things get difficult, when it gets more disruptive, you've got to care more because they care more. Right before the Gulf War started, I was an F-16 squadron commander. Mike Chinberg was in my squadron. He had stayed behind when the squadron deployed to get married, finish his local checkout, become mission ready, and then he came over about 2 weeks before the war actually started. So we were giving him a quick spin up to get him used to what we were doing over there. He was a young guy. We were trying not to push him too hard. And then 3 nights before the war started, Chins was on a night training mission up near the Saudi-Kuwait border, and we think he got his flight lead's rotating beacon mixed up with a light on the ground. And he tried to rejoin on the campfire or whatever it was. He hit the ground in full afterburner, about 60 degrees, nose low, inverted, going about 670 miles an hour. I'm pretty sure he died relaxed. I don't think he had any idea where he was. It's happened to a lot of us in this room. Luckily, we didn't hit the ground. Now, you won't be surprised by Mike's mom and dad's reaction when they were notified, or by his wife April's reaction when she was notified. And I certainly wasn't. What surprised me was my reaction. I'd been around people dying in the Air Force for a long time. My dad was a fighter pilot. We had families all around us. His fathers died while we were on the base. I'd never been in a flying squadron up to that point in my career where somebody hadn't been killed, at least one somebody. It wasn't the death that shook me. It was the fact that he was my guy. I was supposed to be leading him. I was the commander. I walked out to the airplane with him that night. We were parked side by side. I wasn't flying in his flight, but we walked out together. What did I not hear in his voice that would have given me a clue that he wasn't ready? What did I miss in his checkout when I certified he was mission ready that I should have caught? Might not have made much logical sense, but I felt like I killed him. His death was my fault. I still feel that way. Before Mike left to come over to the desert, or I guess as he was leaving, I called his new wife, April, who I hadn't met, and introduced myself over the phone. I said, April, I'm sorry he's got to join us, but we need his help. Don't worry, I'll bring him home safe. I lied to her. you got to care. If it hurts, you're doing it right. The tougher it is on your people, the more you got to care, and the more it's going to hurt you. Embrace that. Don't run from it. These are the things that matter in my mind when things get disruptive. None of them are complicated. But I believe they're all critically important. You know, one of the things that causes disruption these days is people who don't know what you do and don't know how good you are at it. And it creates a lot of blow and fuzz around you. I think it's important to step back occasionally and realize that men have been fighting on land and at sea for thousands and thousands of years. But the age of air, space, and cyber power is just dawning. We're just getting started. That wild blue stretches out infinitely in front of us from here. The Air Force is the most critical, integrating, and enabling force on the battlefield today. Just is. It's also the most dominant force at the point of attack. Just is. And it can be the most dominant force in the battle space in many scenarios, if it's allowed to be. Don't apologize for that. There's no need to. No service is more important than any other service. They've all got to be great. America needs that. But don't back off half an inch on the importance of this one. And when it really gets ugly and you feel that stiff breeze in your face, think about this quote from Sir Winston. And thank whoever you like to thank for giving you a leadership opportunity that'll make you better. Let me finish with one other picture. Brian Everstein, are you here? Brian writes for Air Force Magazine online. You guys have been following the last couple of weeks of this memorial flyby up in Sheffield, England, where Tony Folds, who was 8 years old when that American B-17 circled the field with a bunch of kids playing on it, including Tony, trying to find a place to land their damaged airplane. The kids thought they were just saying hi to him, so they're waving back. The B-17 pilot's trying to get him to get off the grass so they can land. And finally, in the third pass, he started to make an approach, and Tony said, I thought they were just going to land anyway. We'd have to get out of the way. But at the last minute, the pilot, in his mind, obviously didn't want to risk hurting the children, tried to climb away. The airplane lost control and crashed in the local woods, and all 10 crew members were killed. Tony made it his life work. He built this memorial. He plans to have his ashes buried behind the memorial. Because this is how he feels. I know exactly what he means. It's good to see you. Thanks for letting me be here. Thanks, buddy. Hold on a second.
Thank you all. I want to thank General Welsh. Those of you that know General Welsh, I mean, this is who he is. This is what you see is what you get. I was blessed to work next to him for 3 years. And that saying that we use in the Air Force, never leave anyone behind, that's the way we all felt about him. He had our back, and this is the kind of the counsel and sage advice we got whenever we went to see him. The other thing I'll mention is, because the folks mentioned it to me, generally, after the first break, we lose about half the audience. Not the case today, Chief, and this was because of you. So I want to present this Airman for Life coin. You are the epitome of an Airman for Life. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much. If you just hold a second while we reset the stage, we'll get started again in just a minute. Thank you.